Welcome back to The Manual, podcast where we talk about the stuff most men's podcasts are too afraid to touch. Today's episode is going to be wild, raw, and real. Buckle up. Welcome back to The Manual, the podcast where we talk about the deep, messy, and beautiful work of becoming a whole integrated man. I'm super excited. Today I'm joined by a man who's been in my life in one form or another most of my life, growing up at the church that he's been at for a long time, and has been on our team as a coach for the past almost year already. So, Chris, it's super awesome to have you join us. You are in your camper right now, back on your way out to the wilderness. What's up? What are you up to? Where you going? And great to see you.
Great to see you, Joe. It's great to be here and finally get a place on the manual. I'm on a fishing trip in a canyon on the west side of the Bighorn Mountains in Wyoming, and I'm en route. I'm meeting up with a longtime friend that he and I are gonna spend a few days fishing for rainbow trout in this awesome place.
Amazing.
That's my adventure today.
Yeah. So you're going fly fishing.
Fly
right?
fishing. Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
When did you start fly fishing?
I started in my 20s.
Okay.
And now I'm 60. And I don't do it as often as I'd like. It's just a wonderful, I love doing it. And it's a great sport.
I'm sure there's nothing better than standing in the middle of the body of water you're fishing in and walking up and down creeks and having the fish swimming under your shoes.
And
Nothing
a
like
lot
it.
of other stuff too. I've had a beaver jump by me before that scared the daylights out of me. But anyway, all kinds of cool stuff happens.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I'm super excited that you're on your way to another adventure, because we're going to talk about adventure and going on an adventure and the inner child coming up in the midst of all of that today as our sort of main topic. And so I just brought it up, but you introduced me to this topic of the inner child. Great sort of auxiliary mentor of both your and I's through the work that we've done trying to integrate his work into our lives. Dr. Eddie Caparucci wrote a book and resource and then holds trainings on this concept of going deeper in the inner child work. And he has 12 archetypes of inner children that he's seen through his work of helping men integrate themselves so that they no longer have to use pornography or other forms of sexual acting out to escape their reality and the discomfort and pain that they face. Both you and I have found it incredibly important to our own journey and healing. And you were the first guy to ever introduce me to the book. And I think it occurred earlier, but when you introduced me to it and we started integrating it into our own coaching practice, I asked you the simple question: if you only could bring one resource to a guy you were coaching, what would you give him? And you reached back on the shelf behind you and grabbed this book and said, I'd walk him through this. I'd love to just know from you as we get into this, the sort of the practical day-to-day of what that's looked like for you recently. Why has the inner child work been so crucially important for your own journey of healing?
Yeah, well, first of all, just the idea of like inner child, that in itself can kind of be a bit of a block for guys that, I've dealt with that, or like, I'm a man, I don't have to do that. And at the point of my just determination to get healthy, it's like my pornography story spans almost 50 years. And so at the point of, I got to change this, it's like, leave no stone unturned. I'm going to dive into this. So when I was introduced to it, it's like, no, I'm going at this all in. And that was just the determination to change. And there was the destruction I was causing others, but there was the destruction I was in myself. And so every step of diving into the work of reflecting back on these archetypes as each one individually, and for anybody that kind of takes this on, it's not easy. It's painful, and it's not something you just run through. It's something you really take time and just explore. And suffering is just part of the equation. And that it's crazy how much our past and the suffering in our past is impacting our present. And no matter how old you are, but I think it's specifically crazy for guys in my age, around in their 60s, that all of a sudden, are you kidding me? My childhood damage is like just blowing up in my
Yeah,
60s? What's
yeah.
that all about?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, most guys would assume, they hear you saying that you would have figured it out by now, right? Or should we have this expectation of, "I should have solved that by now," and so you wanna hold that assumption. I also hear you saying, as you generalized it to most men, that maybe if your disposition was different at the beginning of your journey and someone proposed this idea to you, of you need to go back to 8, 9, 10, 11, because that's where the real gold to unlocking freedoms is stored, you would have scoffed at it, or at least had a lot of resistance. Would you say that's true? But because your disposition was like, whatever you tell me, I'm willing to do because my path, my plan hasn't worked out and isn't working out. And so you had this kind of disposition to surrender that allowed other people to give a resource like this to you that maybe even was uncomfortable for you when you started. But because of the way you engaged it, you realized, holy cow, this freaking matters.
Right, right. And even like before I started doing this, I was given a task of writing a letter to my 10-year-old self. Now 10, my age at 10 years old, just around that time, my dad left our family. And so my mom raised 6 kids by herself. And there was a lot of chaos and trauma before that event. But going back to that particular age of innocence in my life, and even then, I can remember some experiences I had that really kind of stamped the innocence and pure heartedness in this young Chris.
Mm,
And so then following that age, there was this contamination. All of this discovering pornography or pornography discovering me. I mean, that was only one part of it.
mm,
There was so much others in terms of developing anger, developing like I would say a survivor attitude of I just don't give a shit,
mhm,
trying to steal myself from being hurt. So going back to that innocent time and writing to myself about here's what you don't know is about to happen. And it's unfortunate. And I want to embrace and hold and sit next to, it'd be like any kid that's going through or that's about to be exposed to all the things that destroy kids' idea of themselves, bring about insecurities and all that stuff.
yeah,
So anyway, the book just helped me dive into it even deeper
yeah,
as it suggests
yeah,
and really pick out specific areas of pain
yeah,
that were transformative.
yeah,
So the value of that in addiction recovery is being able to identify when I have these emotional triggers in my adult life, it is very frequently that they come with a connection to my adolescent or younger life. And if I really am honest, I can identify like when this is happening. Let's say something took place on a recent trip that my wife and I took for 3 weeks, where she was kind of bothered by this storm coming, and this woman at a gas station just invaded my space like in a way that I wanted to punch her.
mhm,
And all of a sudden I'm unraveled. I felt like I was 12,
mm,
11 years old, and I wanted to kick and scream and hit, and like I could connect how I was feeling emotionally too. And so where is that? Why is that? Why is that the case? Well, the body remembers. The brain keeps score. And we've carried these reactions, these survivor strategies throughout our lives. And as a believer, you'd like to think, well, the Lord delivered me from that. Well, the Lord's crucifixion was a process. His suffering and death on the cross was a process. And this is a process. Now, the reality is he's been walking with me all the way through it. And thank God now here I am at 66, and I'm glad I'm not 67.
Yeah.
And that I can face this, that I can connect this, that I can go sit with that 11-year-old and say, hey, I know how you're feeling. I get it, but you're not going to control the ship, and I'm going to take care of you.
Yeah. 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 I mean, there's so much to what you just laid out there. I mean, what struck me about like, why does this happen? So much of our brain is geared towards survival, like you said, is geared towards keeping us safe. And the child, being a child, if not given the route by adults in his life, learns maladaptive ways to keep him safe. But if it works, he'll go back to that same response again and again and again and again. And that's what porn does. Is it really, in a very effective way, alleviates short-term pain, right, and discomfort. It is effective in terms of the way that it hijacks the biology and the neurology that God designed for our own safety and steals it to create this loop of that addictive behavior. And so the child learns that this is a safe place to go with that emotional turmoil, that pain that nobody else understands, the feeling lonely, the feeling lost, the feeling stressed, the feeling abandoned, the feeling bored, etc. Right? And that's what I love about the inner child work is the archetypes, because it gives me language and visualization to be able to see. And I'll talk a little bit about that today as we explore the specific stories that you and I have just lived through recently. But I'm the stress child through and through. And being able to describe myself and see my inner child as the stress child. Okay, how is the stress child showing up right now? What's he running to? What's he going to? How's he responding to others' behavior? And then that's the second thing that I absolutely love that you just said at the end of your remarks is that the response, his response will always be with us the rest of our life, right? We don't get to control the fact that we get so boiled up at those specific interactions, but we do get to choose to differentiate our adult self and our inner child so that we're not enmeshed in the emotion and unable to then control what we do next, right? And so we create space like, oh, I see him and I can do something now to lead him, right? Rather than, well, I'm just freaking angry, so I have to outlet the anger, right? And the only thing I can do is go punch a punching bag instead of a person, right? That's not the solution, which oftentimes I think men get to of like, well, I'm just angry, so I have to find some way to outlet my anger. And the best I can do is to redirect my anger towards people I don't care about versus people I do, or into a athletic pursuit versus people I love, or the work that I do, etc. Rather than what's the consistent emotional themes that come up, and then what's the most effective way to respond to this? What works, and when it works, usually just like porn, you can do it again and again and again and again, and it's effective every time, right? And I think that's another part of the reason why I've experienced men, myself included, getting so frustrated by doing story work is it feels so muddy, so gray. Like, well, okay, how big of a role does that one specific event play and all the rest of this stuff, or that one emotion? And so this, for me, has made it simple in a way that for so many years it was complex. Like, oh, a new memory is coming up, so I gotta go pray through that and talk through it all. And yes, to some degree, like as new memories come up, that's the body and the brain releasing that stuff so that you can integrate it. But learning the simple approach at the same time of day-to-day life, right? I got to figure out how to live today and not act out, but also still be respectful of the people around me. And how do I learn how to live in love and better understand the way that I'm loved rather than these maladaptive responses and coping mechanisms that we've all developed back to our young childhood. So I want to dive into now those specific scenes of this past, say, month, 2 months. You and I were both on vacation recently. Funny enough, I think we were in South Dakota at the exact same time. Though we didn't realize it, I was staying in Custer, South Dakota with my family for 8 days. You were all over the place, Colorado. It was Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, and then up to South Dakota. Is that right?
Colorado, Wyoming, South Dakota. We
Okay.
missed Montana this time.
Yeah, and The rest of our time, we want to kind of gear it towards the inner child in relationship. Both you and I are married. You've been married a lot longer than I have. I just celebrated 10 years this year. We have a 9-year-old, which feels crazy. You got adult children that are my age. And so there's so many, I mean, year differences, roads, journeys that we walked. And so I think we'll be able to bring some fresh perspective to this from your experience, from my experience. And then we want to sort of talk through it through the lens of this inner child work we just dialogued about. We want to be as honest as we can about the relationships that we're in so that those that are listening to this can benefit from it and see it playing out in their own relationships while also honoring the women that were married, because both you and I, Chris, are married to incredible women who have been faithful to us through our journey and chaos and struggle, who have been incredible mothers and wives and pillars of our community. I mean, both of them have held places of incredible dignity and responsibility in our community, helped so many people, both have incredible servants' hearts. So I just want to say that off the bat, that this is not to disparage, to put down, to talk about them as if their inner child is the problem. We want to shine the light on our inner child as the work that we're doing, but it's done in the context of intimate relationship. And that's a messy process, right? That's not one inner child at play. It's two. And learning to be able to, I mean, that's what you said to me when you and I talked off of your trip, is that both of your inner children, you and Karen's, were triggered by each other. And the work that it took and how challenging it was, even being in your favorite environmental places on earth, for both of you to work that out in real time. And so that's what we want to spend our time talking about. So maybe you could just set the scene of your journey. You guys went for 3 weeks out to these 3 different places, came back home, and then start talking a little bit about maybe what that was like, what you've learned about your inner child through that time, how you saw him show up and the role he played, the role Karen's inner child play in that dynamic. And then, what sort of happened, in your words to me, you said something to the effect of, there were many times where it felt like, let's just pack this up and go back home. But you didn't. You guys stuck it out. You engaged the pain and discomfort. You kept going and you made it back home. So yeah, I'd love to hear about it. What was that like?
Yeah. And, first of all, in all of this, for anybody listening or watching this, that understanding where you are at in the process and the importance of self-awareness. So, one of the things that kind of rises to the top for me is that the very thing I long for in connection, in in a relationship, that, the idea that you have about a marriage relationship is this love and compassion and life of togetherness that is in all phases of life, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and sexually. But like these other parts really, and sexually encompasses all of those. And this longing for connection. And how interesting it is that the very thing we long for, we'll sometimes fight and kick and push away. And it's like, I know the equation for this kind of relationship is what Paul repeats, and the Apostle Paul repeats again and again and again in his letters, of being kind-hearted, love one another, be compassionate. And it's like, I don't know, we kick and when that child shows up, man, there's some, no matter how close you are, you're in 2 different places of working on this. I've got resources and wisdom and development and things poured into my life that my wife does not have.
Yeah.
She's got her own. I've got my own. Sometimes they work well together, and sometimes I don't understand it.
Yeah.
So having that awareness, like, makes it that whole, if we're reading Paul, the Apostle Paul, and we're going to love and we're going to have compassion and we're going to have patience, like, all right, I got to live this. So, all right. Oh, there were cues going into this trip. So every year we've taken a long trip out west in August. And, uh, there were cues going into this trip that things are going to be tougher. And I was aware of them, and just kind of little struggles in our relationship. We've been married 35 years on Sunday. So Sunday was our
Wow.
anniversary. And this is where I talk about what is my relationship with truth? There's the truth of I'm being very transparent about my sexual activity with those that are especially sinful sexual activity with my accountability people and my group and the people that I'm working with to get free. I'm being very transparent. But there's also the truth of like, my wife is not my enemy. She's my partner. I can trust her. So even though she's reacting in a way right now to her triggers, I'm still safe.
Yep.
We have a long relationship and so there's so many truths that that we need to pull in. And the truth or the falseness, the lie of she doesn't love me, she doesn't understand me, she's not listening to me. All of those things that we fill our brain with that are not really true.
Yeah.
They're not true.
Yeah, they're almost either misinterpretations of the challenging, difficult emotion we feel, like they're just filling the gap with stuff, or they're these old scripts that, like you said, show up every time there's any kind of negative emotion that comes in that relationship. And I mean, you're perfectly describing in Eddie's solution steps to dealing with the inner child. I think it's step 4, which is distinguishing between what you feel and what is real, right? And that's responding to feeling with truth, which is ultimately reframing, right? I'm choosing to change the frame, the conscious thoughts that I give the emotion that I feel or that I experience, and that's gold.
Yeah, and even know that, one, I affirm you, Joe, for all of the content that you've built into the Freedom Group and all of what you're doing in providing a resource with great material for becoming engaged, becoming perceptive, becoming a man who is aware and using their thinking capacity. So in that content, there's the attention you put on negative thinking. And that's a daily monitor. And a lot of us think, you just automate. The automation topic that is in this content is also huge. And we don't realize that we have options. And we don't acknowledge that we have creativity, we have skills, we have wisdom, we have experience, we have things that are counter to the negative thinking that we just kind of live in.
Yeah.
And so dealing with that, removing that. And so it's like, look, I got to breathe. I got to breathe. I got to take some time away from just reacting to engage the part of my brain that is creative,
Yeah.
the part of my brain that is patient and loving, and not let that child just run the show
Yeah.
by kicking and screaming and
No, it's so
doing
good because, part of the fear of going back and doing any inner work is that the inner stuff in us will become more dominant in controlling our current existence, right? And it couldn't be further from the truth because the goal of any healing or transformative work isn't to make excuses from your weakness or your brokenness or the role that your inner child plays. In this case, the goal is to learn how to lead him. You're responsible for him, right? Nobody else is. Nobody's going to do the hard work for you that you described off the top of this. You have to choose to do it. Right? You have to choose to learn how to create some liminal space, the space in between trigger and response, trigger being the emotion, and then what action, what beliefs do you inhabit, et cetera, and then what you do with them, right? Which you're beautifully describing now. So what do you do in that space to be able, and you said, I mean, you use the concept of taking space, so getting physically away from whatever's triggering you, move away, whether it be your phone, a person, create space and breathe, right? That is using the body to calm down the brain, right? We say in some of our early content on craving that it's nearly impossible to control an overwhelmed mind with the mind, right? You can't think your way out of emotional dysregulation. So use the gift that your God has put in your body that animals in particular do reflexively when they're and different groups like Navy SEALs are trained to do when they're in heightened situations where normally they would freak out and go into this fight or flight state. How do you calm down in those states? How do you learn when the game is real, when you're on vacation with your wife and you guys are about to get into it? What do you do now? How do you stop yourself? Because right, to your point, it does feel so automated. I can't control this. I just am this way, right? And that's not the goal. The goal isn't to learn how to, in recovery, to learn how to throw up our hands and say, well, I can't do anything about this. Y'all are just going to have to deal with it, everybody around me. That's not the goal. The goal is to take radical ownership of this is my responsibility to learn how to navigate this. And so when we use the breath so often, because the breath is the only part of the autonomic nervous system that can be controlled by conscious thinking, and breathing has this incredible interplay with the way that our breath communicates to our brain to tell our heart how fast it should beat. And so when we do controlled breathing, deep breathing, we start calming all those physiological responses down and ultimately dropping ourselves out of a fight or flight so that the emotion isn't so strong and we can start thinking more clearly about what is this interplay between what I feel and what is real, right? So I'd love to get into it. Maybe one or two scenes that stand out really clearly from you on vacation. You described this one earlier about the storm and then the gas station, I think you said, with this other woman invading your space. Maybe one or two that come to mind. And how did you see the inner child come up? What emotion did he express? And then what did you do to be able to stay in it and move through it?
Yeah, yeah. So we were going between two events. We were at a funeral in northeastern Wyoming, and the next day after the funeral, we needed to get to Central Colorado for an event that we were going to. So we had an 8-hour, 9-hour drive. We were about halfway there, and I stopped to get gas, and there was this building storm happening, which, for me, I'm used to this kind of stuff, and it's just part of my makeup. And so I've got a gauge on, we're going south. That storm seems to be coming from the west and heading northeast. I think we're good. And anyway, that's all going in my mind without saying a word. Like, Karen has no clue. All she sees is these black, like, death is about to approach us clouds. And what do we do? So we stop and get gas, and I'm like, I'm in a hurry. Like, let's go. Let's do this. And I'm pumping gas, and this woman comes up within 2 feet of me, behind me, and just starts saying stuff. And I'm like, get out of my space. What are you, like,
Yeah.
and like, invasion for me is a big thing. And
Mm.
when I feel invaded, like, I got to work on that's a work for me.
What's your immediate response when somebody invades or something invades your space, whether it be emotional or physical? What's the inner child's response? Is it immediately anger?
It is. It's so right away,
Yeah.
anger.
Yeah.
Like, immediately, the inner child response is anger. You are in my space.
It's a strong fight reaction, I'm assuming. You talked about, like, wanting to go to blows. It is a defensive, I will fight you, immediate response.
Yeah. So, and that, we got two different triggers going on. And we got kind of a time thing happening too. So, we're trying to get somewhere and we're going to be in the car. So we get back in the car, and in all of that process, Karen took over the gas. I kind of held back this lady, and then I'm like, I got to get out of here. Karen spilled gas on herself. And let's get in the car and get out of here. Well, what we should have done and didn't do was pull over and just kind of settle. But as it was, there's in all of this, in terms of relationship and connectivity, there are some important beliefs and rules that I just got to stand on.
Hmm.
And I hate gaslighting. It's not Karen's fault. None of this is Karen's fault. I can't put her down for her reaction for her child. Like, I actually, and I'm serious about that. I hate gaslighting. And the other thing is, I guess it's related. The word Satan in Greek means accuser. And like, well, I'm not going to accuse either. So I'm not going to take on my enemy's tactics
Yeah.
and accuse.
Would you
So
s
again,
would you say, Chris, that those are principles you've always held, or through this inner work, you've realized that those are sort of non-negotiable principles in the context of relationship when your inner child shows up as like, "Those is the boundaries. I do not cross these fault lines." Would you say that's the case, or have those been more long-standing principles you've held to?
so I would say yes and no.
In
So
that before doing the work, you would say that you violated them more frequently?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you have them as conscious principles, but you've become more consistent. And again, that's not the goal. I mean, the goal eventually is perfection, but the goal is progress. I am making progress on living out of my ideals or my principles at all time. And I think, I mean, again, getting to the point of we're not just talking about our stories for the sake of storytelling. What's the principle? What's the goal? And I think you're hitting on something so crucially important for as you go through your inner child work, you have to learn what the inner child wants to do and then create boundaries of the things you absolutely will not do, right? Is I will never do blank. No matter how triggered I am, no matter how angry I am, no matter how much I want to. And to your, I love what you said of like, I didn't communicate any of those things that were going through my brain. I think that's all of us men can relate. Like, we have expectations. We just never told anybody about them, especially our spouse. And so we're pissed off when they start communicating expectation or change of events because we're like, no, that's not the plan. Well, we never communicated the plan to them, right? And so learning
yeah,
to practice that skill of communication certainly, but that sort of stuff's going to happen, right? In the game we're playing and doing deep relationship with a spouse. And I think the goal that you're pointing to, which I think is so valuable to capture here, is create your boundaries, create your principles of when my inner child is triggered, I will not do blank, right? And that might look
right.
like I won't get on my phone or I won't go sit on my computer and try to do work. I won't whatever those boundaries are. I mean, you just laid out two great ones. Hold to them and then communicate them, right? When you're regulated to your spouse, I want you to hold me to the expectation that when we're in it, I don't do blank and I don't do blank,
Yeah,
right? Because
right.
usually, at least in my experience, one of us is more regulated than the other, right? And we can be demanding, like don't talk to me like that, right? Is different than, hey, you communicated to me that when you get like this, that you would like to do blank, is very different than don't treat me that way or don't gaslight me, Chris, right? Responding that way is a harsh sort of shouting down the inner child, which certainly would escalate the inner child versus like, hey, you communicated to me that when you're like this, you don't want to do that. And it feels like you're doing that right now to me, you know?
Yeah, and again, by diving into these archetypes, it's not all of them may not apply to everybody, but it does is reality that many of them do apply.
Yeah.
So, like, two that rise to the top for me are the inferior child and the entitled child. But, we already talked about when your space is invaded and there's the safety and security and, there's the emotionally voided, meshed child. So
Yeah.
there's so many different things. All that's to say that, in my man up view of myself, like I can own my feeling, I can own my problems, I can own the things that I've done. But being so much more aware
Yeah.
of when this child is showing up. So like right away, I know what's happening. Like I know, hey, here's my kid.
Yeah.
It's right here
Yeah.
and get back in the truck and start driving and we were both boiling and again I can hear and understand myself and I can hear and understand my wife. So while I may not have been like actually going through the breathing in a way that I'm going to pass out at the wheel, I'm going through the breathing in a way that I got to just be aware of my breathing. And like the cue is, yeah, my heart's racing. I'm amped up. I'm ready to fight. I need to slow down. What I need. And so already that kind of development over time
Yeah.
of exercising these tools, I need to breathe. And so just paying attention to our breath. You know, the thing about that, well, I just want to mention, it is so deeply mentioned throughout the Old Testament. There's like clues and instruction and like, do we pay attention to it? No, it's Eastern crap.
Yeah.
What it is throughout all of Scripture
Yeah.
that God breathes into us the breath of life.
Yeah.
And so anyway, really, all right, let's accept that and let's use it. And so what that has the capacity to do is something that needed to happen, and that is to reboot. But what do I do? How do I reboot?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I hear and understand that I am amped up about having my space invaded. I hear and understand myself. And I hear and understand how I react to that and the anger and the resentment. And what is true is I don't have to resent anybody, not even this woman that kind of jumped behind me. She didn't have a clue,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah.
So it's like, no, and it's not this woman sitting next to me that we're on this. So then I can shift to hear and understand and care.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's an important step.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, just to parallel a little bit my own experience of my trip is it was a decompression of the season that we came out of getting through Isaiah through treatment for his cancer, having a newborn, and then a month later leaving on this, basically our first time of like no thing to deal with, space on this trip. And there were stuff that came up that I still had to deal with that took up the first couple of days that were back home type stuff. But it was space. I'm told you before we hopped on here that I'm the stress child. That's my number one archetype. And one of the hallmarks of the stress child is we live in stress. Like we're rarely, if ever, at a state of peace, right? And so tension and stress is ever present. And so it oftentimes is just treated or normalized with a certain kind of numbness, emotional numbness, rather than being attuned to what we're experiencing. We just avoid or numb out very quickly in order to be able to keep doing life, right? And so the trip for me was really had far less to do with my wife or my kids triggering that. I was just in that state. I was already avoiding. I was already numbing out. I was already having a hard time and trying to figure out how to get myself out of that. So it was far less environmentally triggered more than it was that I was just in that, in sort of like a persistent experience of, I don't know why I'm stressed. I'm just overwhelmed. I'm just overwhelmed, right? And I've learned, and I didn't ask for it nearly as often as I should, but I have this really important memory from my childhood, a scene that I have from my inner child or my young self, about 8, 9 years old, crying into his pillow in his room. And my mom and dad would come in for a minute or two. What's wrong? What's the problem? Like trying to figure out what's going on. And I wouldn't have words to articulate it, so I wouldn't respond. And they'd get kind of frustrated, or, I got something else. I got 4 other kids to deal with, so they'd leave, right? And I'd be left to deal with this emotion myself. And so the mentor coach that was walking me through this memory invited my adult self to go into that memory. And I see my adult self go into that room and sit down on the bed and say, "Hey, it's okay. I'll be here with you as long as you need." And he put his hand on my back of the inner child and just stayed there and just sat there. And I could attunement. Was physical attunement. And I could tell that the inner child started to calm down. And then as he started to calm down, thoughts started to come, like our interpretation of the feeling. Why am I feeling this way? Right. And so then the older me started to ask him questions. What's going on? What are you carrying? Similar to what my parents asked. But I'll stop. There's more. There's the 3 parts of it that are distinct, that are important for me caring for myself when I'm overwhelmed. The first and the most important step that I so often neglected was asking somebody else for physical attunement. I need you to be physically close to me. I need a hug. I need a hand on my back. Can you just be close to me for a while? And when I'm feeling overwhelmed, so often, to your point, the last thing I want to do, largely because of learned behavior and the way that relationships were in my childhood, I don't want anybody near me. My immediate reaction is to say, get away from me. The way that my wife perceives me is, I would prefer you not be in the room and to not be around me the rest of this vacation. And actually, you're probably going to feel like I would just prefer you weren't with me at all, ever, you know? And so I'm doing the opposite of the very thing that I need. And it's absolutely, that's not on her. That's on me to learn how to, when I feel that way, to notice the emotion as a red flag of, oh, here he is. You're feeling overwhelmed. This is the stressed child. And invite her to be physically close to you. You don't need to try to solve the problem. You don't need to try to work through the emotion mentally, because that's what she wants. She wants to help me sort out the emotion. She's a therapist. She's pretty good at it. Like, tell me what's going on. I don't know, right? But you and I have talked about that before. One of the most difficult questions for a man to answer is, what do you need right now? Right? And I've had to learn that one of those guardrails or sort of guidelines, boundaries for me is to, at the beginning of that, don't try to sort it out or solve it intellectually through thought. Ask for physical regulation or physical attunement. Can you just sit next to me and hold my hand? Can you just put your hand on my back and just sit here with me? And that feels super vulnerable. It feels super weak. And even more than it feeling vulnerable or weak to me, it feels like the last thing I want, right? That my immediate reaction is leave me alone. I just want to be left alone, right? And I've said that to her before. Yeah, I don't know. I just want to leave. I just want to be left alone, which again is the very opposite of the thing that I so often need. Now, coming back from that trip, what I have, and this is the second thing that I've learned about the stressed child, is I'm triggered by her emotional dysregulation. Anytime I experience anger from her, anytime I experience wanting to fix external environment, she loves to keep the house clean, and that helps her regulate her emotion. So Saturdays it has always been an interesting time in our relationship. She wants to clean the house. She usually gets frustrated that it's not being cleaned fast enough or not right. And then I either get angry or I avoid and shut down. I'm leaving. I'm out of here. I can't do this, right? I can't. And my response has so often been, if you're going to show up like that, I can't handle this, right? And again, it's been super helpful for me recently as we've navigated some of those issues and still being in a pretty intense season environmentally with our children and everything going on in our life and all the change occurring, to know that about myself, to know that, oh, it's not your fault necessarily, but it's super helpful to know that my stressed child goes to 11 the second your inner child comes out. And I immediately go to overwhelm and stress. And I don't experience it as or name it as overwhelm and stress. I blame, like you were saying. If you wouldn't do this, it's your problem. You're making us all stressed out. Right. And I've often said that to her, like, look what you're doing to the rest of the family, which is, again, isn't fair to her and isn't even true. Right. But it's my experience is your emotional dysregulation creates overwhelm in me, which is true, but that's my responsibility to learn how to deal with. And then how do I lead that child? Because the reality is I do want to help her clean our house. Like the reality is I do want to serve my wife. I do want to care for her needs. I do have the capacity to be able to wake up on Saturday and clean every week for the rest of my life. That's okay with me, my
Yeah.
adult self. But my inner child doesn't want anything to do with it. If it has anything to do with emotional dysregulation, if it has anything to do with anger, if it has anything to do with anxiety, I want out. And so for me, it's been learning to stay in it and not just staying in the circumstance of that dysregulation, but learning to stay in within myself and practicing so many of the tools that you just dialogued about. Anything else before we close this discussion? Anything else that comes to mind for you that you're sort of taking home or taking away as you've learned to develop and continuing to develop the relationship you have with your wife and caring for where you guys are at now, since you've had some time to reflect on that trip and being back home for a while?
Well, and just hearing you describe your trip and then returning home and how child and child, your wife, Krista's child, your child, when they are together, showing up at the same time, it's almost the perfect storm, right?
Yeah.
If you want to call it that.
Yeah.
Now, in this, the manual, to validate how real this is and not to diminish it or minimize it in that I'm supposed to be a man. So as you were describing all this, like, all right, your need for touch and your recognition for that need. We have feelings about our feelings, right? I have this emotion right now. And frankly, I feel like shit that I have this emotion right now. This is
Yeah.
not a man emotion I want to have.
Right. Right.
And a lot of times, for a lot of men that are living in habituated problematic sexual behavior, as Eddie calls it, that those feelings about our feelings become insecurities, they become criticisms, they become I can't deal with the fact that I feel embarrassed about the feelings I'm having right, or
Yeah.
and so now I'm going to numb that. So like you're dealing with the need to have this physical touch contact, and how do you feel about that?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the reality is, I mean, like you said, it is the feeling is I wanna deprive myself of that. I think that's the genuine feeling is I want nothing to do with I want nothing to do with that.
And that may be a cue or a clue as to why we push away from the very thing we want, because we're critical of you needing that because we're not supposed to need anything.
Right. And the oftentimes the accusation or thought is you aren't safe to me, you being my wife, so I have to recluse or I have to move away from. But by and large, that's not the case. It's very often that again, these generalized events trigger these core wounds and core memories from early childhood, and the inner child generalizes that same category of event. So oftentimes relational conflict gets all categorized together as unsafe conflict means unsafe person, distant self from person, right? So the experience is very often the reframing required is exactly what you said is you are safe to me. I can trust you. You can hold me if I ask, and you won't reject me if I'm willing to do it. And that's the truth is my wife has never showed herself to use if I'm willing to ask for what I need, to use that as an opportunity to blackmail me. I'll only do that if this happens to use it against me. Never. Ever, ever, ever. She's never shown herself to be deeply not deeply untrustworthy in the way that she responds to my weakness. It's my response to my weakness that creates the barrier. That has been the wall.
And that's a valid adult need. There's definitely the way the child shows up. It's our adult wisdom, our adult like do you know what the statistic is of how much of our brain we actually use?
In terms of like in a day,
Yeah, like what percentage of our brain are
yeah,
we actually
neurons
there's
fire within a day. Don't. I mean, I imagine just thinking about it logically, certain areas of your brain are high activity all day. I mean, like your visual cortex, you're taking in information all day, and the highways that run there are super active, right? Same with all of your senses. Those parts of your brain are generally pretty active throughout the day. But then there's the deeper, more conscious parts of the brain that aren't just always online, the feelings parts of our brain, the memory parts of our brain that are more dormant, right? And so they have to find a way to fire together often enough to be able to stay alive, and they're looking for reasons to do it, right? To make connections, to so that they can create meaning and context out of reality, all out of the way that we perceive our senses, right? And then all of that's ultimately consciously perceived up here at the front of our brain in our prefrontal cortex, the human part of our brain. But no, in
well that,
terms of percentage, I'm not aware, but that would be my guess is the outer parts of our brain a lot more active than the inner parts of our brain are, apart from our cerebellum, which again is pretty automatically online and active to do some basic functioning like heartbeat and breathing, etc.
what I'd like to it makes it makes sense to me anyway that the lizard brain, the amygdala, the fight, fright, freeze part of our brain is really where our child brain lives. And so getting into the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of our brain in addiction and in habituated problematic sexual behavior, we don't engage that. So here in all of this, it it's holding on to developing these skills, this wisdom, these tools to live free, to live self aware in who our identity is.
Yeah.
And there are clues and cues, emotionally, physically, that tell us that if we develop this thinking, this idea, this knowledge, we're going to be able to understand ourselves so much better, so much more fully.
Yep. Yep. So good. What would you to close here, Chris, what would you say to a guy who listens to this and says, like, I gotta figure this out? Like that the conflict, the disconnection, etc., that's at play in my relationship is spot on, and I could understand it if I were to do this work. What would you say to encourage that guy, to point him in the right direction to be able to start on this journey of doing the inner child work first and foremost for yourself, and then as you do that work of self-awareness building and integration building in yourself, the way that that will extend out to those relationships. What would you say to encourage him, uh, to do it?
Yeah. Well, like myself, it's yeah, our marriage was like at a point of the edge of the cliff. And I had a determination that if I were to die tomorrow, I didn't want to have looked at porn yesterday or today. I had to get this right in my own life. Yeah, our marriage relationship really mattered to me. Yes. And the most important thing, motivation for me, is I got to get out of this habituated life of spending hours and hours. So, all right. So, for that, the answer to that question is to the degree of determination that you got to figure this out. Like if you decide to get the Dr. Eddie Caparucci's book, Going Deeper, and the workbook with it, it's painful. It's as we started off in our discussion today, it's going to expose some trauma. You don't go through that alone. You got to have it's so much more valuable and I like so much more necessary to have somebody with you in that. And so whatever resource you choose, like the Freedom Group and the others, SAA, I don't know if SAA even understands that. But whatever it is, you want to have somebody walk with you in that and somebody to be able to process it with
Yeah,
you. If you're married, it's not going to be your wife.
yeah,
It's not.
yeah, yeah,
It's got to be somebody that has the ability to tell you hard things and stand with you in the hard things.
yeah, yeah. So good. Yeah, I mean, 2 things that just to say that back, 'cause I think, again, I think that's both of those ideas are gold. It's the disposition of heart. I mean, it's the coachability, teachability. I am ready to listen to somebody else show me the way out. To get to that point for most men, you're right, takes way too long and is really, really hard to get to the point that you're willing to listen and to consider things like this as worthwhile, right? Because most of us like to believe that we're smarter than we are, and that if I have resistance towards it, it probably is the thing's fault rather than my fault. It's
Well,
probably some issue that that concept or idea or principle contains rather than the defensiveness that I have because of what it exposes in me.
yeah. Well, the reality is my best thinking got me here.
Yeah, that's right.
No, I need somebody else's thinking
Yeah,
because, like,
totally.
and the other part is, in all of that, what you just described is like, what if I'm wrong? What if those beliefs that I can fix this myself? What if I'm wrong?
Right,
I can't.
right.
There's people that have experience and skills I don't have.
Yeah. Which is the challenge that you talked about. It's not only awareness building of going back to 9, 10, 11, and learning the way that you learned to respond to these really hard things you learned that you went through as a child, but then unlearning them and learning new ways of responding. That's hard to undo 50 years of responding and say, you know what, this time, even though I've been doing that for so many times before in automation, automatically, I'm going to choose a different way. There's a lot of resistance to be able to make that and endeavor that new path. But the more we do it, I mean, this is the science, the brain's capacity to change and rewire. The more we do that, the more we create a new thing. And so, just two other things to capture. One, you talked about pornography and not wanting to have done it again. And I think this inner child work is a beautiful validation that porn isn't the core problem. in our life. It's the solution that we've learned to cope or to mitigate the problems that we carry. And usually those problems are way back at the beginning of our stories. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing is don't do it alone. We tell every guy on discovery calls is we don't care if you do our thing. We think it's pretty good. We love the results we get. We're honored to be able to walk through with all the guys that we do. We just want guys to do something because we know how long it took for us to become convinced we should ask somebody else for help. And we'd love if every guy we have the chance to talk with found something and did something rather than be convinced that their current approach is maybe good enough for another year or another day, even. So we encourage every guy to just do something. And that something requires giving away some aspect of your autonomy to listen to somebody else, to be mentored by another, to be coached, to be challenged, to be pressed in with by another. And that's painful, especially when we've come to these principles or beliefs that other people aren't believable or aren't worthy of our trust, or authority is to be questioned rather than to be acknowledged and to hold to, right? So, and again, it's not becoming cult-like and giving away all of our freedom. The reality is ultimately it does stop with you. It's ownership, learning how to reintegrate your life and live your life as a whole and holy man. That's the ultimate objective, and you are responsible for it, but you also need others to do it. I don't know a single man that has come to the end of his recovery journey and like, I figured that out myself. That's not a story you hear in any recovery story that has actually worked. And so we'll land the plane there, whether it's a 3-week camping trip or a long weekend that goes sideways in relationship, in your journey. This is real life. And like you said, it's an honor to be able to be living life at the age we currently are, to know what we know today, to experience what we experience today with the tools that we have to be able to do it differently than maybe we did a year ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago. This is the deep work of becoming a man who can hold space, show up, and grow. If you want help doing that, we have a path for you. Chris and I both get to coach guys every day, every week through this type of stuff. So Freedom Group enrollment is now open. We're building the wait list for one more group this month. So if you want to join that wait list, certainly reach out, schedule a discovery call. We'd love to help you get those same sort of tools in your life so that you can be craving free and to become that whole and holy man in the life you live today, so that you can experience it first and so that all the world around you can be blessed by you being a good and noble and responsible king in the dominion and authority that God has given you to rule the earth in the way that he originally desired when he first breathed life into his most prized creation. So, and that's you. So we're grateful that you spent time with us if you made it this far. Chris, thank you so much for making time on the way out to this incredible adventure that you're living. I'll certainly be praying for you. Please pray for us, all the men that are doing this work while you're away. And we look forward to be adventuring together someday in the wilderness sometime soon. So
Yes.
y'all, much to come. Thank you so much for being here. Peace.